of all of this. We start off with the most central puzzle in making sense of any of this stuff, which is, so what's up with female orgasms? And we've got right off the bat the simple problem of making sense of this biological phenomenon, and one where fertility is not dependent on it. One does not need to have orgasms to become pregnant, to give birth, to pass on copies of one's genes. So what's the deal with orgasms? First off, a question we will wind up asking with a whole lot of the behavior coming down the line is, are we the only species? And all sorts of careful studies have shown that we are not the only species. Other apes, other primate species as well, monkeys and apes, show orgasm among the females, and that is detectable by all sorts of physiology we'll hear about in a while. We are not the only species. One of the really bizarre, pathetic things about trying to do research in this area was one of the first papers that ever demonstrated something which physiologically was identical to female orgasm in rhesus monkey females, which wound up being a paper in this journal Science. Down there in the footnotes, the authors had to indicate this did not make use of any federal grant money to carry out this study. Just to give you a sense of where some of this stuff sits. Okay, so what's up with female orgasm? It is not necessary for conception. It is not necessary to increase the number of copies of your genes in future generations. Despite that, there is some evidence that it facilitates fertilization. And the technical term that's always been given for that is, bizarrely enough, facilitation. The notion is something about the vaginal fluid, something about the biochemistry of, increases sperm motility. Sperms swim faster and harder and jump upstream back to spawn or whatever it is the sperm are doing with more avidity, with more energetic displays in an environment of more vaginal secretion. And orgasm greatly increases that. So the argument there being that orgasm facilitates fertilization through the sperm facilitation process. Evidence for that has always been a little bit indirect. It is not airtight that that happens. Another argument for why this increases fertility, and this is sort of an interesting one. And the notion here is that what an orgasm does is, among other things, exhausts you enormously, causing you to be far more likely to be horizontal than vertical shortly thereafter, and thus facilitating fertilization because the sperm don't have to swim straight up against gravity. I kid you not. This is one of the leading models out there. Then there's the orgasm facilitates female conception out of reinforcement theory, which is back to the it feels good, and thus you are more likely to do it again and increasing the likelihood of passing on copies of your genes. All of this is wonderful. All of these possible mechanisms where even though female orgasm is not necessary for conception, it nonetheless increases the likelihood of. That's great. However, what most of the studies have shown, though, is there is no relationship between the fertility of a woman and her propensity towards orgasm. It does not seem to play out insofar as any of this facilitation or horizontal swim enhancement techniques or whatever actually occurs. These are not big enough of an effects to actually make a difference in terms of reproductive success. So what else? What else is known about it? There is a certain degree of heritability of propensity towards orgasm in females, and this is shown with all our standard behavior genetics techniques in terms of comparing dizygotic versus monozygotic twins. We know what to do in terms of not overvaluing findings like those. Nonetheless, they are there. So, if a basic puzzle is why do females have orgasms if it's not necessary for conception, and in fact the evidence is not great that it even facilitates it, why on top of all of that, why such things as clitoral orgasms, which the studies generally show are more easily brought about than our vaginal ones? What's up with that? Even more of the same questions. Now, somewhere in there is lurking the heartbreaking possibility in making sense of why female orgasm exists, the dreadful possibility that what we're dealing with here is a spandrel. and that it is a spandrel. It is simply baggage brought along that those guys have to go through this orgasm physiology to do any stuff with sperm and pass on copies of genes and all of that, and it's simply baggage that the same physiology occurs in females. That orgasm is simply a spandrel in women.